Right now, the state of South Dakota, which gave its name to BB-57, a fast battleship that fought from the Solomons to Tokyo Bay, has no battleship. What South Dakota has is a concrete outline of one laid into the grass of a city park, 680 feet long. Indiana has a mast standing on a university lawn. Both states gave their names to battleships. Neither state has the ship. In 8 other places along the American coastline, there is a battleship you can walk onto this year. Every one of them carries the name of a state, and the 2 states that came away with nothing are the 2 whose ships were among the hardest fighting of the war. The South Dakota fought the Japanese battleship Kirishima at knife range in the dark and came home with more than 24 holes in her. The Indiana carried her guns from the Gilberts to Tokyo Bay. Neither of them exists anymore. Most people assume the ships that got saved were the ships that earned it. That is not what happened, and it is not close. What decided which battleships became memorials and which became razor blades was not their record. It was whether the state that gave them a name had a piece of water deep enough to park them in. South Dakota does not. Indiana barely does. Both ships went to the breakers while less decorated ships were tied up and open to the public. By the end of this video, you will know exactly why those 2 states came away with nothing, what actually survives of both ships and where you can go and touch it, and why the state of Iowa, which has no coastline either, ended up with the opposite result. Before we keep going, thank you for being here, and I want to ask you something genuinely. Where in the world are you watching this from? And if you live in one of the states that has a battleship named after it, have you ever been aboard her? Or is there one in your family? A father, an uncle, a grandfather who served on a state? Put it in the comments because those are the ones I read first. Start with what these 2 ships actually were, because the argument only works if you know what was thrown away. The South Dakota class was 4 ships: the South Dakota, the Indiana, the Massachusetts, and the Alabama. 35,000 tons on paper, 9 16-inch guns, and a design built around a hard limit. A treaty tonnage cap that forced the designers to fit battleship guns and battleship armor onto a hull that was shorter than it wanted to be. The result was a stubby, heavily protected ship that everybody who served on one described the same way: cramped, hot, and extremely hard to kill. 2 of those 4 are museums today. The Massachusetts is at Battleship Cove in Fall River. The Alabama is at Mobile. You can walk both of them this year. The other 2 are gone. Same class, same guns, same war. Though the South Dakota was built by New York Shipbuilding Corporation at Camden, New Jersey, and the Indiana by Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia. Here is the part that makes it worse. The South Dakota is arguably the most famous ship of the 4, and for a while she was famous without a name. In 1942, the Navy would not release which battleship had done what the newspapers were describing, so the American press called her Battleship X. People followed a ship in the papers for months without being told what she was called. What she had done was this. At the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands in October 1942, she was screening a carrier and took a 500-pound bomb on her number 1 turret, and her gunners were credited with shooting down 26 Japanese aircraft in a single action. I want to stop on that number because it is the one that gets fought over in every comment section, and the people fighting over it are not wrong too. 26 aircraft in one day, claimed by one ship, is an enormous figure. Anti-aircraft claims from the Second World War are notoriously inflated, not because anybody lied, but because when 8 ships are firing at the same aircraft and it falls into the sea, every one of those 8 gun crews watched it fall. Analysts who go back to the Japanese loss records almost always find the true totals are a fraction of what was claimed at the time. So when somebody in the comments says the 26 is a myth, the honest answer is the claim is real, the credit was real, and the number is almost certainly too high. All 3 of those things are true at once. That is how wartime claims work. And the South Dakota's reputation does not need the 26 because of what happened 3 weeks later. On the night of the 14th and 15th of November 1942, off Guadalcanal, she went into a night action with the North Carolina-class battleship Washington against a Japanese force built around the battleship Kirishima. The task force was commanded by Rear Admiral Willis A. Lee. And then her electrical system failed. A cascade of breakers tripped, and the South Dakota lost power to her radar, her fire control, and most of her guns. In the dark, in the middle of an engagement with an enemy battle line in front of her, she was briefly a 35,000-ton target, illuminated by Japanese searchlights, with almost nothing working. The Japanese hit her. The Navy's own war damage report says at least 26 projectiles, and some accounts of the action put it higher. While she was being torn up, the Washington put her main battery into the Kirishima at close range and sank her. One of only 2 occasions in the entire war in which an American battleship sank an enemy battleship in a gun action. Her superstructure was wrecked, her radar was gone, her communications were gone. She did not sink. She did not even come close to sinking. The armor did what the designers had promised it would do, and while she was being torn up above the waterline, the Washington, which the Japanese had not seen at all, put her main battery into the Kirishima at close range and destroyed her. The South Dakota went home for repairs and came back. She finished the war in Tokyo Bay. That is the record. Now here is what happened to her afterwards, and it takes about 1 sentence. She was decommissioned in 1947, sat in reserve for 15 years, was struck from the Navy list in 1962 and sold for scrap. The Indiana BB-58, her sister, went exactly the same way. Struck from the Naval Vessel Register on the 1st of June 1962, sold, cut up. So why did the Massachusetts and the Alabama live when the South Dakota and the Indiana did not? Here is the machinery, and it is not romantic. When the Navy is finished with a ship, it does not hand her out to whoever admires her most. There is a donation process, and the standard has always been brutally practical. A group, usually a state commission or a non-profit, has to prove several things at once. That they have a berth. That the berth is in water deep enough to float the ship and reachable by a channel deep enough to tow her there. That they can maintain her indefinitely. That they have the money now, not in a hopeful future. The 2 of those 4 conditions that kill everything else are the first 2. You need deep water, and you need it in the state that wants the ship, because the entire emotional argument for a state-named battleship is that she comes home. Massachusetts has Fall River on a tidal river off Narragansett Bay. Alabama has Mobile Bay. Both states had somewhere to put a battleship that a battleship could actually reach, and both states went and got the money. And I want to tell you how they got it, because this is the part of the story that gets sentimentalized, and it should not be, because the real version is better. In 1961, the state of North Carolina wanted its battleship, and the campaign that saved her was called Save Our Ship. It was run through the schools. Of the 1.1 million school children in North Carolina at the time, around 700,000 of them gave at least a dime, nickels, dimes, spare change out of a pocket. That campaign raised more than $300,000, and the North Carolina came up the Cape Fear River to Wilmington, where she still is. 3 years later, Alabama did the same thing, and something over 1 million school children gave lunch money and spare change toward the roughly $100,000 the state needed. The Navy handed the Alabama over on the 16th of June, 1964, with one condition attached that people always forget. The government could take her back in a national emergency. So 2 of the 8 battleships that exist today were bought in a meaningful part by children under the age of 18 who did not have jobs. That is the mechanism. And now watch what it does to a ship that does not get it. Now look at the other 2. South Dakota is landlocked, not has a small coast, has none. The nearest ocean is over 1,000 miles away in any direction. The Missouri River runs through the state, and you cannot tow a 35,000-ton battleship up the Missouri. The depths, the bends, and the locks make it physically impossible, and that is before you get to the fact that she draws more water than large stretches of that river hold. Indiana touches Lake Michigan at its northwest corner, which sounds like an opening until you follow the route. To get an ocean-going battleship into the Great Lakes, you would have to bring her up the St. Lawrence Seaway, and the locks on that system are not big enough for a battleship. Not tight, not big enough. A South Dakota-class hull is 108 feet wide. The Seaway locks are 80. She physically cannot pass through, and no amount of money changes that number. So both states were out, and they were out for reasons that had nothing to do with what their ships had done, how many men had served on them, or how much the citizens wanted them. And if you want the proof that this is about water and campaigns rather than merit, it is not the South Dakota, it is the Washington. Go back to that night off Guadalcanal. 2 American battleships went in. One of them lost power, took more than 24 hits and survived. The other one, the Washington, stayed hidden, opened fire at close range, and sank the Kirishima. It is one of only 2 occasions in the entire Second World War in which an American battleship sank an enemy battleship in a gun action, and it is arguably the single most effective 5 minutes any American battleship ever had. The Washington BB-56 was decommissioned in 1947, struck from the Naval Vessel Register on the 1st of June 1960, and sold for scrap in May 1961. Her sister ship, same class, same design, same yard, is the North Carolina, and she is a museum at Wilmington today because North Carolina's school children emptied their pockets that same year. Same class, same war. One sank a battleship in a night action. The other one had a state with a river and a campaign. The one that sank the battleship is the one that got cut up. Whatever the rule is that decides these things, it is not merit. There was no bad decision. There was no committee that turned them down. There was a bend in a river and the width of a lock. That is the answer to the question in the title. But it is not the end of the story, because both states did something about it, and what they did is the part I actually find remarkable. If you cannot bring the ship home, you bring pieces of her home. In Sioux Falls, South Dakota, there is a memorial that was dedicated in 1969, and it does something no other battleship memorial in the country does. On the ground, in concrete, they laid out the ship's outline at full size. The entire footprint of the hull, 680 feet of it, in a city park, so that you can walk the length of the ship on the grass and understand how big she was. Inside that outline, they placed the real objects. One of her 16-inch guns, 94 tons of it. Her flag mast, the actual one. Her bell, a propeller, plate, fittings, pieces of the ship itself. So the state without a coastline built the only battleship memorial in America where you can walk the deck plan of a ship that no longer exists, on dry ground, 1,000 miles from the sea. Indiana did the same thing in a scattered way. The Indiana's mast stands at Indiana University in Bloomington. Her anchor is at Fort Wayne. Her bells and a battle flag are at a war memorial in Indianapolis. More pieces are in schools and museums around the state. You cannot visit the Indiana, but you can stand under her mast on a university lawn in a landlocked county and put your hand on it. And before I leave Sioux Falls, I want to say what that outline actually does to you, because I did not expect it when I read about it. A battleship in a harbor is impressive and slightly unreadable. She is a gray wall. You stand on a pier and you see a hull and a superstructure, and unless you walk the whole length of her, which most visitors do not because it is a long way and there is a gift shop, you never really take in the size. The outline does the opposite. There is nothing to look at. There is a line in the ground and you have to walk it. 680 feet in the open in a park in South Dakota with a 94-ton gun barrel sitting in it and a mast standing up out of the grass where the mast was. Somebody made a decision there that I think was better than they knew. They could have put up a plaque and a piece of plate. Instead, they built the ship's absence at full scale so that the thing you experience is exactly the thing the state lost. Which brings me to the thing that a commenter pointed out under one of these videos, and it is the sharpest objection in this whole subject. There is no coastline in Iowa either, and that is completely true. Iowa is as landlocked as South Dakota. The USS Iowa, the lead ship of the last class of American battleships, is a museum today at berth 87 in the port of Los Angeles, California, about 1,700 miles from Des Moines. So the rule is not, a landlocked state cannot have its battleship. The rule is that a landlocked state cannot have its battleship at home. The Iowa was saved because a coastal city wanted her. Los Angeles had the water, the pier, and the visitor market, and the name on the bow simply came along with the ship. The same logic explains the whole list once you see it. Go through the 8. The Missouri is in Hawaii, not Missouri. The Iowa is in California, not Iowa. The Wisconsin is at Norfolk in Virginia, not Wisconsin. The New Jersey is at Camden, which is in New Jersey, and that one is a genuine coincidence of geography rather than a policy. Then the four that did come home: the North Carolina at Wilmington, the Massachusetts at Fall River, the Alabama at Mobile, and the Texas at Galveston in Texas after 78 years at a berth 40 miles inland. So of the 8 surviving American battleships, half are parked in a state that has nothing to do with the name on the bow. Nobody planned that. It is what you get when the only 2 questions that matter are, is there deep water, and did somebody run a campaign? Which means the 8 surviving American battleships are not 8 states honoring their ships. They are 8 cities with deep water that took a ship, and the name on the bow was whatever the Navy happened to have available. The South Dakota and the Indiana had no coastal city with a reason to want them in 1962, and no state of their own that could take them. That is the entire difference. Here is the last thing, and it is why I wanted to make this one. The 2 that were scrapped had done more, in a strict record sense, than at least one of the 2 that survived. The South Dakota fought at Santa Cruz, at Guadalcanal, through the Central Pacific, and was present in Tokyo Bay. She was hit by more than 24 shells and stayed afloat. She is on the short list of American ships that took a battleship's punishment and kept working. And she is a concrete outline in a park. I do not think that is an injustice exactly, because nobody did it to her. It is just what happens when a decision that feels like it should be about merit turns out to be about hydrology. Water depth is not sentimental. A lock is 80 feet wide, whether you fought at Guadalcanal or not. So when somebody asks why there is no battleship in South Dakota, the honest answer is not that the state did not care. It is that the state cared enough to build the ship's shadow into the ground at full size because the ship herself could never have got there. If you have stood inside that outline in Sioux Falls, tell me what it felt like to walk the length of it. I have never done it, and I would like to know. And if you have been under the Indiana's mast in Bloomington, tell me that too.